exciting thing about having Chad here today is he's going to make some news. Chad is announcing the creation of a new organization called the Energy Transitions Commission. And you'll be the first to hear about it in the world, and I think it's very exciting because it's going to affect how governments, corporations, and other leaders make decisions about energy. So Chad, what is the Energy Transitions Commission?
The Energy Transitions Commission is a group of 16 commissioners, 9 don't get a paycheck from a company, and the balance due across multiple industries to answer one simple question. We know where we are today around the economy and around energy systems and what that's doing to CO2 and climate. We know where we need to go. There's a lot of people in New York talking about that as we speak, but we got to take the first steps. This commission is to try to take down the barriers to the first steps, put the facts out there in a nice toolkit form so governments, businesses, anybody that wants to take a step will do it. And that's what we're about. And we thought that was missing. We couldn't find that answer anywhere else. And when McKinsey came to us with the idea, we said, well, we'll sign on.
And who are some of the members of the commission?
So we've General Electric, Schneider Electric, Shell is a member.
Statoil as well?
Statoil is a member. We also have the UN Foundation, Tim Worth, World Resource Institute, Andrew Steer.
Right.
So there's
Hank
a real
Paulson.
Hank Paulson,
right?
And I don't know what camp he falls in, but he's somewhere in.
So how did you persuade all these people to join? What did you tell them?
Well, we didn't pay them. This question about how do we start moving is really on a lot of people's minds. And so as we went to them and said, if you can show us somebody else that has this, just tell us and we'll go to them. We won't do all this. And so that was the answer of what's going on.
So what was the hole out there where you needed to be filled? I mean, what was the need? Why did you sense? I mean, a lot of people talk about doing something about climate change, and not many people do.
There was a forerunner commission, the New Climate Economy, that looked at this question: can we keep the economy going and deal with climate? And the answer was yes, and that's all available. But it didn't take the action steps to get moving. And so at Shell, we see this energy transition is going to change our lives. We're going to be a very different company decades from now. Exactly how many decades, we're not sure. We want to start taking the first steps ourselves. So we think carbon capture and storage and funding those projects is a piece of that. So we hope one of the studies will be, how do you do that effectively? What's the difference in a winning project and a losing project?
Before we get into the details, you just said something that really caught my attention, which is that we can grow the economy and reduce carbon emissions at the same time. I mean, is that just fact? I mean, what makes you so confident about that? A lot of people in the Republican Party in this country say, if you go to renewables, you destroy jobs.
So I put one caveat: if you grow the economy the right way, you can do it. If we do it the way we're doing it today, you can't do both at the same time. So there's some technology that needs to be deployed. There's some systems technology that needs to be deployed. This Forerunner Commission, we actually added it up for the next 15 years. What's it going to cost to build out the economy the way that we're doing it today? And $89 trillion in the piece of the economy that relates to the energy system that we're talking about. When we do it in an environmentally effective way, which means planning cities better, shifting which fossil fuel you use, less coal, more natural gas, things like that, it's going to cost $93 trillion. So yes, it costs more, but you have a much more robust, effective system going farther, so it's actually a great investment.
And those numbers reflect the amount of money spent in the global energy system over, a decade?
Yeah, it's over the 15-year period.
15 years.
2015 to 2030. It's the energy system and related investment. So it's the investment. It's not the cost system, it's the investment.
Investment in new technology.
New technologies, power plants, distribution systems, bus, rapid transit, whatever is necessary.
I see. So the big question is, why would anyone believe an oil company trying to advise other people to use less carbon?
I think you have a good question, and I don't believe they would. So that's why we work on this commission,
right?
Because we do believe the Shell company can bring perspectives that are useful. We've been doing scenario planning for 40 years. And it's very interesting to watch as a board member of the company because Jeremy's group, and Jeremy was on the panel earlier today, is going to come up with their answer. They have all Shell's data, they have all everybody else's data, and they came up with an answer, even if the CEO doesn't like the answer. That's what they're going to come up with, and that's what makes it unique and makes it valuable to the board. So we're kind of good at doing that. But and internally we know it's going to be done right, but we think to do this broadly we need these other perspectives. And also we think there's probably a built-in bias being an oil and gas company with the experience we have. So we think the other perspectives actually make a better answer.
So basically the argument is, as Shell, the world is going to become less carbon intensive, but there'll be a role for Shell to play in that world through new technologies, whether it's carbon capture or whatever, and we want to help the rest of the world down this path. Is that the argument?
And we also like to help our shareholders along the way. So it's not just the rest of the world. We have an obligation to our shareholders to do the right thing. We think this is the right thing. We're already more natural gas than we are oil today, not by a lot, but a little bit. And with the proposed merger with BG, we'll move more in that direction.
They're a giant gas company.
Yeah, the oil and gas, but that will move us in that direction. So we know we have to change the company, exactly what role we play. We're trying to figure that out. We're very good at very large projects. We really like taking on large, technically challenging projects. We have a strong research organization. How do we apply it to a new transition, a new energy economy? We don't know the answer yet, and we hope this commission will help find the answer.
A few years ago, I had a lunch with one of your former CEOs, Peter Voser, and I asked him why Shell was still in the wind industry business, and he said, that's a good question. And it seemed like Shell, over the last few years, has really been focusing on fossil fuels. Do you see a Shell 10, 20, 30 years from now that has a large renewable business as part of its portfolio? Is that where this is headed?
You bring up my good friend, Peter. And he would say early on, we put a few $1 million behind everything and see what would happen. And that was probably pretty accurate. That won't work today. So, we're in solar, we're in wind, we've done a lot of different things. We got to be smarter with this next transition. So I don't know where we'll be. I don't know what the answer is, but I know the world needs our systems capability, our distribution capability, everything we can bring to the party to find energy solutions for the future. I think we'll be an energy company of some kind. It's going to have oil and gas in it for a very long period of time, but it's going to start having other things that we can bring to the party.
So could you give us some concrete examples of the kind of information that the Commission wants to disseminate to decision leaders around the globe?
I bet solar has been mentioned on every panel you'll have here in these few days. But how do you really design the right solar distribution system? The panel just before the previous one was talking about community solar systems. One of our first studies is going to be not the technology of solar, but the systems definition, mini grids, and what does it amount to, and how should it be done in the right way. So that's going to be one of the questions that we think is going to be first up.
And you're not going to do original research. You're going to get experts to look at the best research that exists out there and then present it in a palatable, clear way to decision makers? Is that really the thrust of the organization?
Exactly. And if it's already been done, we won't take on that project. So a second project we're looking at is, if you spend any time in Beijing, there's air pollution, and people on the ground that are trying to deal with that air pollution aren't thinking about CO2. They're thinking about what visual pollution, what they can see. Well, if you're going to work on that, how do you do it in a way that's the right way for CO2 at the same time? To make sure you are capturing both when you make the change. So that hopefully that'll be one of our second studies.
Excellent. I'm going to shift the conversation just slightly. You just came back from some meetings with the people running the COP22 talks in Paris in December. What did you take away from those conversations, and what can corporations expect to come out of COP21?
I think it's going to be one of the more successful meetings we've had of that nature, because I believe the leaders are going about the right way. They're extracting commitments from countries, but they're not binding commitments. Would be my prediction. They haven't had the meeting yet, so I can't say for sure. But I think there'll be ways to measure progress. I think there'll be natural competition between countries that want to be, leaders in technology A or technology B. I think that's very constructive. They'll naturally have companies that want to partner with that. I'm very encouraged with the steps that are being taken. The Pope kind of reining in, positive, didn't hurt any. It was interesting. I was with a group of people in this session, and there was a group that briefed the Pope and prepared him to see whether he wanted to take the climate change issue. And this one individual, I'm sorry, I don't recall his name, but he was leading the group, and he had thousands of pages of documents and multiple studies, and so he was getting ready to go see the Pope and said, okay, what can I show the Pope? He said, you can't show him anything, you can only utter 2 sentences. And he was really let down. But his 2 sentences were, I won't get them exactly right, but it's this climate change sustainability issue is very real. Sentence 1. Sentence 2, the 3 billion poorest people in the world will pay the biggest price for this issue. And then the Pope had a lot of questions. But when you think about it, those probably weren't 2 bad sentences.
Right.
For the Pope.
For the Pope. But with an agreement that, whatever agreement comes out of Paris, if it's not binding, how's it going to work? I mean, why will countries decide to cut their carbon? Is it peer pressure? Is it grassroots pressure? Is it papal pressure? I mean, what?
Look, it's not perfect. But when we've tried for Kyoto-type binding agreements, they didn't have very good success either. So I think Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz said it pretty well. What we need is a nudge. We need something to get us moving. And that's where I think companies will come in. I hope this Energy Transition Commission will help with that. So as companies want to step in, what do? This will be the answer to that. We'll create some of those answers. But companies generally don't want to be left behind. They see things moving. This whole Brainstorm session here is an example that things are moving very fast. And so all my experience is if you think it's moving, you don't want to be late in what's going on. I think there have been successful treaties. Montreal Protocol on CFCs and ozone layer worked.
Yep.
And it worked because companies took the leadership. Companies decided they're going to make it happen in 5 years, and government came along. So I think there's a place here for companies that are looking out for their shareholders at the same time to take a leadership.
In about 1 minute, we're going to take some questions, so be thinking about what you'd like to ask Chad. President Xi from China announced a national cap-and-trade program. What's your take on that? We've been reading opinions that it might not be enforceable in China. There might be a lot of room for wiggle around the regulations. What do you think? Is it
I think that's all true. Look, China's got its challenges. I wouldn't never bet against China. I've always seen China as a bumpy road. If you wait for it to be a smooth road, you'll never get anything done. You travel it too fast, you're going to get very sick. Right. So I think these motions seem like reasonable first steps because they've got to keep the economy going. That might not be bad first steps for some other countries too. Right. To think about, and because they're not perfect, I wouldn't go with it. I just go back to this Energy Transitions Commission again. We in Shell do not know what it's going to look like, what that new energy system is going to be 4 decades from now, but it will be here. But my guess is it's not one thing. And that's why we think it needs this kind of detailed studies. We won't just suddenly move from oil and gas to X and Y. It's going to be multiple things, including energy efficiency in a much broader way that will get us to where we need to be. And I think we'll be thinking about energy in so many different ways. So that's why we need multiple studies to make this happen. It's not one big thing.
Got it. Questions out there? In the room back here, please. Stand up and identify yourself.
Kate Murphy, McKinsey. Can you talk to me a little about carbon capture? How likely is that to happen?
We have a big project that we're actually launching next month in Alberta. The carbon capture varies tremendously depending on the geographic surface you're trying to capture it in, how much it costs to collect it before you can capture it, what form you need to put it in before you put it in the ground. So you can see prices from, let me call it X to X plus 300%. And so what we think is important is to get multiple projects out there, see how much you can drive down the cost by doing them, and then find the ones that make sense. Some will probably not make sense.
Yeah.
But if we can find the ones that do make sense, I don't think it's unlike solar. Once you get a lot of solar out there, we've really driven the cost down. We'll drive down the cost of carbon capture and storage. We won't do it by just talking about it or doing paper drawings.
Right.
So we need
and
more
to accelerate that, Chad, we're going to need some sort of tax on carbon, and Shell's in favor of that, whether it's a cap or a tax.
We're going to need something. The project we have in Alberta, we're working with the Canadian government to make it work. Mm-hmm. So it's not a tax, it's actually a co-investment with us. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to take something to make that work. In Shell, we charge ourselves $40 a ton for carbon. We have a vice president of CO2 that goes out and enforces it, make sure we're making decisions based on that $40 a ton in all of our economics. So I think more things like that you could do.
We have another question right here. Please stand up and identify yourself.
Yeah, Tom Kuhn, Edison Electric Institute. An earlier panel, Chad, and I think the commission sounds like a great idea. I think it's fantastic.
We welcome you
I
in.
Appreciate your leadership. An earlier panel talked about autonomous vehicles, the greater electrification of transportation as we get develop more batteries and things. Is that a topic the commission might want to take up?
Absolutely. That certainly could be one of our topics. And of course, I'm not sure what the panel said, but it all depends on how you generate the electricity, what difference it's making to the world.
Right. Generating from coal doesn't make much sense, right? There's a question, right there.
Jules Kortener, Rocky Mountain Institute. Chad, you talked about the transition for Shell in terms of decades. And on the other hand, our institute has a reputation of being overly optimistic about the speed at which we can make this transformation. And certainly we feel the pressure of greenhouse gas emissions behind us. Talk to us about that timeline and how quickly we can do this and how maybe Shell's thinking is evolving on that.
I think to try to say this is exactly how long it's going to take, I wouldn't listen to anybody, you guys or us, because none of us know for sure. What we think is critical is to get started and take the steps, because we do think we'll go down this learning curve very fast. And so that's what we're advocating by this commission, is to get moving faster with bite-sized portions, learn from it, share the technology that comes out of that, and we think it's a real plus. So let's just take natural gas, which we think is a big part of the equation. We could debate forever whether it's a destination fuel, it's a bridge, or it's an off-ramp. I don't care. Let's just start the road, and we'll find out when we get there which one it is. And so we need to pick up.
One last question. Yes, right here. We have a mic. It's coming down.
Thank you. Howard Scheer from Hitachi. There are three thoughts. We've talked about strategy and policy, but many times culture triumphs strategy. And knowing that the global population will add 2 billion, and Shell is very global, most of the fossil fuel and the carbon footprint will come from the developing world. Have you given some thought of how that culture could be changed?
Great question.
In this energy transition, we have got to serve the 1.3 billion people that didn't turn out a light switch last night before they went to bed because they don't have one. We've got to focus on the 2.4 billion people that are going to cook on a stove that's going to prematurely end their life before the day's over. So as we make this change, I think it's very important that we look at the needs of the developing countries. Africa, we think, is going to be the largest growth as far as economic development and population development over the next several decades. So to have this transition without taking that fully into account, we'd just be missing the whole boat. And we having a very unsustainable world. So the commission sees that. We're partnering. We have Conde Yemkela from Sierra Leone on the commission. He led the UN's Sustainable Energy for All effort. So it's very much a part of that. And yes, a lot of those resources are in those countries, and we've got to find a ways to develop them in a way that will get the value out, but also bring up the standard of living for people.
Well, we could go on forever about this, but I just want you to all realize the import of what you heard today. A major oil company, one of the largest in the world, publicly and actively deciding to take steps to decarbonize the global economy. So let's hear it for Chad. Thank you for that.